Good glowing day, Adam's blessed. It is I, RadKing, here to deliver another sermon. This one focused on mapping out the Brotherhood's presence and escapades in the Commonwealth. The Cartographer had to work extra hard this time because the Brotherhood refused to accept him within their ranks. But they did make it easy to track them because when they're not flying in their airship or crashing in their vertibirds, they are usually leaving a path of death and destruction. The Brotherhood has an interesting history with this region, and is one of the most well-documented of all the factions in their war against the Institute. So, crank up the rads, and let's look at the battles and missions that comprise this war, and see how it shakes out from a bird's eye view, to tease out interesting details we may have never considered before. Also, at the end I want to show off a fan-made roleplay Discord server, so if that is something that you would be interested in, hang out till the end, or look up the timestamp in the description to learn more details. As usual with the Cartography series, I am always interested to look at the Brotherhood of Steel, where they have been, and where they can be found in the years before the start of Fallout 4, which is in the year of our Adam, 2287. I then like to progress and see how that changes over the course of the game. The Brotherhood of Steel has quite a history within the Commonwealth, and their first documented entrance to the Commonwealth happened in 2280, 3 years after the events of Fallout 3. The mission was, by all metrics, a success, and the Brotherhood group returned with historical documents, technical documents, and pre-war technology, all of which they had salvaged from the Commonwealth. And that's all we really know about the Brotherhood's first mission into this area. The next mission we know of from the Capital Wasteland to the Commonwealth occurred in 2284, known as Recon Squad Artemis, named after the Greek goddess of hunting. This venture did not go nearly as well as the first, and they almost immediately ran into serious problems. We can't be sure how they came into the Commonwealth, because a holotape from the squad's leader, Paladin Brandis, mentions that they ran into troubles 6 hours after insertion, which makes it sound like they were dropped off by a vertibird. After only a matter of hours, they were attacked by an unknown enemy right here close to the MedTech research facility. From a holotape that recorded part of the battle, we know that they were ambushed by a group of enemies, and that the damaged and fuel-depleted power armor suits had to be scuttled to keep them from falling into the hands of their assailants. We know the MedTech Research Center, which is the location closest to where we find the casualties, is filled with feral ghouls, but this doesn't sound like a ghoul attack. That leaves 3 other possible groups who are in locations nearby. There are raiders that can be found at the Malden Center Metro Station, which is a group led by Helter Skelter, but I doubt it's them because terminals in the subway station mention that Skelter and his group had recently found the place when we as the player go there in 2287, and this is 3 years prior. Gunners are in the vault underneath the Malden Middle School, which is just north, but they don't have a big presence on the surface. Rather, all the gunners are down in the vault. Super mutants can be found at the Medford Memorial Hospital and would have no problem assaulting a group of power-armored soldiers. But the Brotherhood wouldn't need to scuttle power armor to keep it out of the super mutants' hands, because super mutants can't and frankly don't want to use power armor. The final possibility, as I see it, is that it was the Institute that perhaps saw a chance to wipe out a heavily armored team of soldiers that recently appeared in the Commonwealth. Of all these possibilities, I think the Gunners are the most likely, since they would directly benefit from the scavenged power armor, followed by the Raiders, and then the least likely, at least in my mind, would be the Institute. I would love to hear your thoughts here though, on why you would think so, but I do think the key here is that they felt compelled to destroy their power armor. Regardless of who attacked, the damage was catastrophic, and this 7-man team was cut down to only 3. As was said before, to make sure that the power armor didn't fall into enemy hands, the armor was scuttled, and 5 sets of fused and unusable power armor can be found in the destroyed house here. The 3 remaining survivors would push east towards the National Guard training yard, which they knew beforehand was a location of interest. The 3 survivors were able to shelter long enough to amend their plans, and in a very questionable move, they left behind Knight Aslan, while Brandis and Scribe Ferris pushed forward to the Revere satellite array. It isn't clear what they hope to accomplish here, although it is possible that they may have tried to use the satellites to try and communicate back to the Brotherhood in the Capital Wasteland. The 2 came under fire from the super mutants, and Scribe Ferris took a bullet to the leg. In the frenzy of battle, a distress beacon activated from Knight Aslan, who had been left behind, because she was trying to hold out against a horde of feral ghouls that were zeroing in on her. In yet another questionable move, Brandis abandoned his injured scribe at the satellite array, and the scribe would eventually bleed out and die here all alone. Even though Brandis abandoned his scribe to try and save Aslan, something prevented him from actually getting back to the National Guard training yard, which may have been the horde of ghouls that killed Knight Aslan. I find it interesting though that the National Guard training yard has defense turrets that are active, but they don't fire on the ghouls. They do fire on the player, so maybe they added an additional challenge to Brandis trying to get back. He would retreat to their fallback position up north, which was known as Recon Bunker Theta. Brandis would shelter here and survive alone for 3 years, hoping to see his fellow Brotherhood members make it to the fallback position alive. This is where he would stay until the start of Fallout 4, when the sole survivor has a chance to track him down. So this second foray into the Commonwealth was an unmitigated disaster, and all that the Brotherhood knew back in the Capital Wasteland was that the group had gone dark, and after all this time, considers the squad MIA. It would be about 2 years later when the Brotherhood decided to send another recon team into the Commonwealth, one that would lay the groundwork for their upcoming invasion. This recon team, named Recon Squad Gladius, was led by Fallout's very own Buzz Lightyear impersonator, Paladin Danse. We know for certain that Gladius made their way to the Commonwealth over the course of a few months, so they were definitely traveling by foot. Since the Capital Wasteland is to the south, I think the most likely entrance points to the Commonwealth would be here or here. I say this because coming along the coast is unlikely due to the coastline shape, which would make the journey much longer. I also think that they would have avoided the glowing sea, which would just leave these two routes. I personally think that they came in from the west because the first location that we know they began using as a base was the Cambridge police station. Shortly before finding and claiming the police station, the squad came under a raider attack, and one of the members, Knight Keen, lost his power armor in the fight, but there were no other losses. After clearing and securing the police station, the first location of interest was the nearby Corvega factory just north of their position. They knew that a large group of raiders were there and thought that they could handle them, but they were quickly overwhelmed by incoming fire. One of the knights was wounded by the fighting, and in the retreat back to Cambridge, another knight stepped on a landmine and died not long after. The knight that was wounded by the gunfire would die only 2 days later when their condition worsened, and Danse made the order to let him die via a compassionate medical overdose. A few months would pass before the remainder of Gladius would venture from the police station, but when they did, they went all the way to the coast in order to recon the Boston airport area. They didn't find much of anything and continued on to the next location of interest, Fort Strong. The large super mutant presence there would prove too much for them though, and they would lose another member before being able to retreat, and that is the last known mission that they conducted. At some point just before the start of Fallout 4, the police station would get attacked by a group of super mutants that would damage their communications antenna, leaving them looking for a way to repair it, just as the sole survivor is coming out of Vault 111. We have a pretty decent time frame for all of these events because Danse recorded everything in terminal entries. Each terminal entry seems to record the month, year, and then what number the terminal entry is. And if this is to be believed, they arrived in the Commonwealth in January of 2087, found the police station in February, lost 2 members on the Corvega factory attack in April, scouted the Boston airport and Fort Strong in July, and had their antenna damaged in October. This last entry about the super mutant attack is the final one, meaning that Fallout 4 likely takes place in October, not long after this terminal entry was written. That is the extent of where the Brotherhood of Steel has been and what they have done in the pregame. And here is a population map for the number of live Brotherhood of Steel members in the red circles and the number of dead Brotherhood members in the black circles in the time before the game. This paints a pretty bleak picture for the Brotherhood, as their dead outnumber the living members here almost 2 to 1. We will look at another population map a little later to see how the Brotherhood has grown and expanded over the course of the game, because as one would expect, the change is huge. Recon Squad Gladius located several sites of interest that they wanted to investigate a little further, shown here. Scribe Halen mentions the Cambridge Polymer Labs was an area of interest due to its ties to the pre-war military, and likely had advanced technology or information. The Watts Consumer Electronics Store is mentioned as potentially having technological discoveries and spare parts. Hallucinogen is another area of interest due to their research into non-lethal weaponry for the military and police. Scribe Halen records specifically that it likely contains valuable assets to assist the Brotherhood with crowd control applications, which is sounding a little sinister. The last location mentioned in Halen's terminals is Big John's Salvage, south of Boston, which they think could be good for raw material collection and maybe bits of tech. We know Halen also identified a location known as Listening Post Bravo, a pre-war military intelligence gathering facility in the northern part of the map that only the Gladius team was aware of, and this place will play an important role in one of the best Fallout 4 quests later on. I think most of the areas of interest are pretty standard. They have to do with technology, weapons, raw materials, and spare parts. All of these seem very pertinent to the Brotherhood of Steel, but it's also interesting to think about the dozens of other places that go unmentioned, even though they are close by and would also be of interest, like Green Tech Genetics, the Jalbert Brothers disposal site, Mass Fusion, etc. So we know what they've been up to prior to late 2287, and now it's time to look at how the Brotherhood expands, map the missions they conduct, the battles they fight, and how things change if the sole survivor helps the Brotherhood through the main quest of Fallout 4. Generally, the sole survivor will encounter Paladin Dance and the other two members of Recon Squad Gladius quite early, as they are engaged in a vicious defense against a horde of ghouls. Assisting them with fending off the ghouls leads to Paladin Dance asking the sole survivor for help. The antenna that was destroyed in an earlier super mutant attack needs to be repaired, and they have identified a facility that has some tech that could help them. Dance and the sole survivor fight their way to Arc Jet Systems and encounter a massive force of synths who are there for the exact same item. This doesn't seem to be Dance's first encounter with synths either, because Dance quickly suspects the destruction of the Arc Jet automated security was the result of the Institute. Successfully acquiring the deep range transmitter will make Paladin Dance consider onboarding the sole survivor as an initiate, since manpower is sorely needed by his group that is now at half strength. Paladin Dance will give the sole survivor the next big mission, which is to try and figure out what happened to the ill-fated Recon Squad Artemis. The player will essentially follow the trail of the squad, finding the initial massacre with scuttled power armor near Medtech, the knight killed by ghouls at the National Guard training yard, the scribe that bled out from a super mutant gunshot at the Severe Satellite Array, before finally confronting the only surviving member at Recon Bunker Theta. Paladin Brandis is extremely suspicious of the player and also harbors tremendous guilt over the death of his whole team, and the years spent in isolation have not done him any favors. Brandis can be convinced through charisma checks to rejoin the Brotherhood of Steel, and he will indeed do that, but he won't join Dance's small group. Rather, the next time we see him is when the main Brotherhood force arrives. After successfully infiltrating Arc Jet Systems and finding out what happened to Recon Squad Artemis, the Brotherhood elements in the Commonwealth will only engage in Radiant quests, but I want to look at Radiant quests a little later in this video. So the next big event for the Brotherhood in the Commonwealth is, of course, the entrance of the primary fighting force, which consists of an army, an airship, and a fleet of vertibirds. The Brotherhood of Steel bust onto the scene after Conrad Kellogg is deep sixed at the end of the Reunions quest. Leaving Fort Hagen with part of Kellogg's brain in your pocket, you step out onto the roof to see a truly impressive sight: the pride of the East Coast Brotherhood. The Prydwen airship slowly makes its way across the sky, as do several vertibirds, all with an announcer letting everyone know that the Brotherhood of Steel has officially arrived, and that their intentions are peaceful, but we know that's bullshit. The Prydwen makes its way to the Boston airport, which was an area that had previously been scouted by Dance and his Recon Squad, maybe for this exact purpose. The Prydwen moors at the airport, and the Brotherhood gets to work turning the remains of the airport into their primary ground base. Dance will ask the player to meet the Brotherhood, as you are now considered an initiate, and after getting to know the leaders, the big man himself, Mr. I have the coolest coat in the Commonwealth, Arthur Maxson, quickly draws up the next mission. Dance and the sole survivor are to be sent via vertibird a short distance away to Fort Strong, a pre-war military facility that Dance and his team had tried to approach but had been beaten back by super mutants. Maxson orders the attack for two reasons. One is to remove the large super mutant threat that is just right across the water from them, and two, Fort Strong has a considerable amount of munitions, primarily mini-nukes, locked away in its armory that the Brotherhood needs in order to fight their upcoming war with the Institute. The main problem with fighting the Institute, however, is that the Brotherhood has no idea where they are. How do you fight an enemy that you can't locate? The Brotherhood gets a lucky break when the sole survivor discovers through Kellogg's memories that the Institute uses teleportation. And although no one is still very sure exactly where the Institute is, the Brotherhood gets their chance to infiltrate the Institute in a small way. The sole survivor acquires the plans to build a device called the Signal Interceptor that lets them hijack the teleportation signals used by the Institute to transport synths in and out of their base. This is where some intelligence operations take place, something that is far less common with the Brotherhood when compared to factions like the Railroad, and the sole survivor is asked by Proctor Ingram to scan the Institute network for any and all information that they can get their hands on. But there is one more mission objective as well. The Brotherhood plans to rebuild their superweapon that was used to defeat the Enclave in Fallout 3, known as Liberty Prime. Prime had been destroyed in an orbital strike, but the Brotherhood believes that they can rebuild him and use him against the Institute. I mean, if it worked once, why wouldn't it work again? The problem is that they're missing an expert that will enable Liberty Prime's power systems to function correctly, and they have their eyes set on one specific person. Dr. Madison Lee was a scientist in the Capital Wasteland that helped work on Project Purity, would later help the Brotherhood there, but she would become intrigued by the research being done at the Institute to try and find them and join them. The Brotherhood suspects that she is at the Institute and tasks the sole survivor with making contact with her and convincing her to return to the Brotherhood of Steel to assist them with rebuilding Prime. Lee is not a huge fan of the Brotherhood. It's a big part of why she left the Capital Wasteland in the first place, but she has also since become disillusioned with the Institute, and therefore will consider the offer. Successfully recruiting Dr. Lee is the top choice for the Liberty Prime project, but if the sole survivor cannot get Lee to rejoin, then the next best option is to enlist the help of Professor Scara, a robotics engineer that resides in Diamond City. Either way, Liberty Prime will start the long process of being rebuilt, and will require several more missions to finally be resurrected. Usually, not long after making contact with the Institute, one of the largest battles in the game will take place at Bunker Hill, a settlement that is specifically geared towards merchants and trade caravans. The Railroad has been using a secret underground portion to house runaway synths, and the Institute has learned of this. They drew up an operation to wipe out the Railroad presence there and reclaim the 5 escaped synths. The Brotherhood of Steel will catch wind of this operation, either through the sole survivor informing them or via some unknown means if the sole survivor does not or cannot inform them. The result is the same though. The only battle where 3 of the main factions square off against each other will take place, with the Railroad heavies defending the underground bunker and the synths that are taking refuge there, the Institute relaying in reinforcements who try to storm the underground bunker and claim the synths, and the Brotherhood, who wish to just kill everyone on their way to the synths and then summarily execute them, since they're all seen as abominations. The outcome of this battle is based on what the player decides to do and who to support, and since the battle for Bunker Hill was more or less about determining the fate of 5 synths, it didn't have much tactical utility. The Brotherhood don't take over the settlement, and there's no real win here other than being a morale boost and inflicting some casualties on both the Institute and the Railroad. The crazy thing is though, this is one of 3 battles with the Institute that comprises this war that the Brotherhood traveled this whole way for. We are informed of some attacks on the Brotherhood by the Institute, although we never see them. In dialogue from Scribe Halen, she will remark to the player that since their first encounter when the sole survivor helped them fend off the ghouls, the Cambridge police station has been growing due to the arrival of additional Brotherhood forces. She will say, however, that they have been attacked multiple times by synths, but they've been able to fend them off. I can't imagine that these battles have been all that large, but it's interesting to know that the Institute has been harassing this Brotherhood position. Before we get to the rest of the big battles, there are a number of missions that need to be conducted in order to prepare for those battles. The first of which is to obtain the special types of nukes that Liberty Prime uses, known as Mark 28 bombs. These can only be found in one place in the Commonwealth, and it is deep in the irradiated landscape of the glowing sea, an area that the Brotherhood has so far completely avoided, like most others, except for Adam's Chosen. The Brotherhood set up a small outpost on the edge of the glowing sea called Waypoint Echo, where the sole survivor is given a distress pulsar that will be activated when they find the bomb storage facility. The bombs are found at what is called the Sentinel Site, a pre-war nuclear munitions experimental facility. The military personnel there had been conducting experiments with integrating the Mark 28s with ballistic missiles, but the facility had been locked down the day before the Great War, trapping all personnel and ordnance inside. As the sole survivor fights through the ghouls in the facility and negotiates with the surviving elements of the Children of Adam that had somehow broken into the facility, they find the heavily fortified storage room and turn on the distress pulsar that will allow the Brotherhood to come and transport all the nukes that they will need to arm Liberty Prime. The Brotherhood won't stay here though, but Waypoint Echo will continue to be a small base that is occupied by at least 2 Brotherhood members for the rest of the game. While Liberty Prime's munitions are being transported to the Brotherhood's base at the airport, the Brotherhood makes a surprise discovery from the data collected by the sole survivor when they scan the Institute networks. One of their own is actually a synth, but this isn't some new recruit or low-ranking member, it is the immovable Paladin Dance. Dance will actually retreat to a secret location, one that was scouted out by Scribe Halen before the main Brotherhood force had arrived, and thus it is a location only known to her and Dance. Arthur Maxson will demand that the sole survivor track down Dance and execute him for the unforgivable crime of being a synth and not knowing it. Despite everything he had done in the name of the Brotherhood, it is all null and void upon learning that he was born in a lab rather than from a womb. The sole survivor finds Dance at Listening Post Bravo after getting a tip from Scribe Halen, and this is where a choice must be made. Dance is more than willing to accept his fate. That is how loyal he is to the Brotherhood, and the player can decide to kill Dance, exactly as ordered by Maxson. The player can also convince Dance that he deserves to live, going contrary to Maxson's orders, at which point Dance and the sole survivor will come face to face with Arthur upon leaving the bunker. Maxson is nearly impossible to bargain with, insisting that Dance must be executed, but he can be convinced through some speech checks to allow Dance to live, although he will be exiled from the Brotherhood and considered an enemy should he be encountered by the Brotherhood again. The other 2 possibilities are that Maxson will execute Dance, or Dance can take his own life depending on the actions of the sole survivor. But it is an important location because it is where the fate is decided for one of the best Brotherhood characters in the whole game. As the Brotherhood is getting Liberty Prime ready, securing the necessary arms, ammunition, and supplies to confront the Institute, and dealing with internal problems like the discovery that Dance is a synth, they will prioritize a rather peculiar mission. Dr. Virgil is an ex-Institute scientist who ran away from the organization when he grew frustrated over the dead-end FEV work that the Institute was insisting on continuing. He infected himself with a special strain of FEV, turning into a super mutant while retaining his intelligence. Virgil was a key figure in figuring out how to break into the Institute using their own teleporter, and since no good deed goes unpunished, the Brotherhood draws up a mission to have him killed. The sole survivor will be given the task to kill Virgil, as he is seen as a security risk to the Brotherhood of Steel, and once again there are a number of choices. Virgil can be killed as ordered, he can be informed of the Brotherhood's intentions, and his death can be staged, or he can be turned back into his human form by obtaining the FEV serum from the old destroyed FEV lab that was specifically engineered to return him back to his original genetic form. If he is turned back into a human, passing a speech check will make the Brotherhood no longer consider Virgil a threat, although he will be monitored by Brotherhood sources. Failing the check though, the Brotherhood will insist that he is killed even though he is human, and not the hated super mutant that he once was. I do find it interesting that returning him to human form gives him a chance to be spared by the Brotherhood, even though nothing else about him has changed. He is still an ex-Institute scientist of questionable loyalties, and it just goes to show how deep their bigotry runs. Once Virgil and Dance's fates have been decided, the game enters its third act, which is marked by a series of quickly accelerating events. The first is a preemptive strike against the Railroad, who the Brotherhood considers a threat due to their sympathies towards synths and their ability to operate covertly and employ guerrilla tactics. The Brotherhood has decided that the Railroad has the ability to harm Brotherhood operations, and so Arthur Maxson has greenlit an operation that looks to cut the head off the snake. Since the Railroad is so secretive and compartmentalized, the Brotherhood cannot systematically wipe out the whole organization, but they know where the headquarters is, and they have determined that by killing 5 key members, the Railroad will either fall apart or be essentially non-functional, and therefore no longer a threat. The sole survivor and some Brotherhood members will travel to the Old North Church, where it appears the Railroad had enough warning to bolster their ranks, but apparently did not think it necessary, or maybe they didn't have the time to evacuate the headquarters like they've done so many times in the past. Once the agents and heavies are dealt with and the secret entrance to the base is breached with explosives, the entire leadership structure of the Railroad is summarily massacred. If the sole survivor decides to support the Railroad rather than the Brotherhood of Steel through the main story, then a surprise attack from the Brotherhood of Steel will commence in the latter part of the game, which is the Brotherhood's attempt at destroying the Railroad headquarters. In this case, the strike team is defeated, as the Brotherhood has underestimated the Railroad's capabilities, but with the sole survivor on their side, the Railroad is doomed. The Brotherhood is interested in co-opting and reprogramming the Predictive Analytical Machine, or PAM, which they believe will bolster their operational capabilities, and so her recovery is a secondary objective of the Railroad operation. After dealing with the Railroad and largely taking them out of the picture, the Brotherhood identifies the last item that is required to bring Liberty Prime online, a special pre-war technological item known as the Beryllium Agitator that can be found in the depths of mass fusion. Once again, like the Deep Range Transmitter, the Institute is interested in this piece of technology because it will help them get their nuclear reactor online quickly. The Brotherhood sends a large strike force to the mass fusion building, flying the sole survivor to the top of the building where they are to recover credentials that allow them to access the basement where the agitator can be found. This is the largest battle so far between the Brotherhood and the Institute, since the Institute relays dozens upon dozens of Gen 1 and 2 synths into the building to fight off the Brotherhood forces. After retrieving the agitator and dealing with the pre-war security, the sole survivor has a choice to quickly get out with the agitator so that it can be safely returned to the Brotherhood, or they can stay and help the Brotherhood defeat all Institute forces. This will have an effect later. Destroying all Institute forces will lead to the building being continually occupied by the Brotherhood, otherwise it will be occupied by synths after the main quest is concluded. With the agitator in hand, everything is in place, since the Brotherhood now knows the Institute is buried under the pre-war CIT building. So comes the final mission and battle, the most spectacular and determinative of them all. The activation of Liberty Prime, his climactic march to the CIT building, and the spectacular destruction that allows the Brotherhood to break into the Institute all take place during this final battle. With the agitator installed, Liberty Prime will spring to life and immediately set off on his one true objective, to destroy all red communist Chinese. Except there aren't too many communists in the Commonwealth, and the Brotherhood instead programmed him to target pretty much anything that isn't them. I'm actually going to get a little more granular here than I normally do because I think Liberty Prime's path and battles on the way to the CIT building and where the Institute chooses to attack him is a little interesting. Liberty Prime will walk a good ways before he encounters the first group of synths, which is around 8 Gen 2 synths that are teleported right in front of Liberty Prime at the Boston Preparatory School. One reason I find this interesting is because this is the shortest confirmed distance between the Boston airport and where teleportation can happen. This is significant because the Brotherhood of Steel has set up an electromagnetic interference field that blocks the Institute from teleporting close to the base, which is why the Institute doesn't just teleport in and massacre everyone. And I know, if you're the sole survivor and you teleport from the Institute to the Boston airport, you will land right in front of their gates. But I consider that more a quirk of the fast travel system than anything else. We don't know the exact limits of their interference system though, and I think this radius here is the smallest confirmed area that we can definitively say is the closest the Institute can reliably get to the airport. If this actually is the approximate radius, that is pretty impressive, and would mean that some places like Nordhagen Settlement and the Shamrock Tap House would technically be protected. What I find interesting about the attacks that we start to see from teleporting synths though, is that it is only Gen 2 synths, no Gen 3s or coursers. And rather than teleporting them into a more tactically advantageous position, they're always teleported just right in front of Liberty Prime on flat ground with no cover. Why not teleport some behind Liberty Prime and have him surrounded? Why not teleport some onto buildings or on the roof of buildings so that they have cover and are harder to find and kill? Maybe the Institute can only teleport large groups at a time, but surely teams of 2 or 3 synths teleported in front and behind Prime with some on roofs and others in buildings would present a much larger challenge, even if it had to happen over the course of a minute or so. After dealing with the initial attack near the school, Prime will attempt to cross a bridge just north, but the Institute relays more synths in to prevent this. The bridge gets destroyed as Liberty Prime throws a nuke that sets off a chain reaction, so we can't really credit the bridge destruction to the Institute as some clever tactical maneuver to stop or slow down Prime. That little thing probably couldn't hold up Liberty Prime anyway. Water apparently proves to be no problem for the Iron Patriot, and he walks west across the inlet in order to get to his objective. I always hated this part though, because often I am wearing power armor, and walking through water in power armor is such a drag. Once out of the water, Prime gets the first group of reinforcements who have landed a vertibird nearby and will assist in escorting the giant nuke throwing death machine. But let's be real, he doesn't really need much help. Another teleported attack force shows up right around here as well, but much like the previous attacks, it's no problem to deal with. Prime will make his way past Bunker Hill, being a good little patriot, and saluting the monument before continuing into the fourth, and this is a little surprising, final Institute attack on the robot. Again, the attack is nothing special. There seems to be no effort into tactically dealing with Liberty Prime, just more teleporting of synths with underpowered Institute laser rifles and just hoping for the best, I guess. I think some of my biggest issues here is that the Institute has better fighters than just bog standard Gen 2 synths, both in coursers and the specially named and armored synths like A2018, who is equipped with a missile launcher. I just find it silly that they send the normal Gen 2s with basic weaponry to deal with a giant war robot when they have some specially armed and armored synths with rocket launchers just chilling back at the Institute. When the Institute launches their attack on the Minutemen at the castle, they use more synths in the attack and a bunch of coursers as well. So I don't know why they wouldn't try harder to stop the one way that the Brotherhood has to get into the Institute. At this point, Prime is a little over halfway to the CIT building, but the Institute does not attempt another attack for the rest of the journey. Rather, Prime has to fight his way through super mutants, raiders, and 2 super mutant behemoths, which he does with extreme ease, finally arriving at the CIT building. This is where many of the named Brotherhood members like Arthur Maxson will show up to defend Prime as he scans the surroundings, trying to locate the Institute and find the best route through the ground into the facility. He must be defended while this happens, which is easy enough to do with a big group of Brotherhood paladins, and will start blasting a hole with his eye laser and throw a nuke into the ground to force entry into the Institute. So the final battle plays out as the sole survivor and his fellow Brotherhood members fight their way through the Institute, put an explosive charge on the Institute reactor, which when detonated will cause the reactor to go supercritical and to detonate with the force of a nuclear weapon. The Institute is mercilessly wiped out, and the war with the Institute is officially considered over. Should the Brotherhood win their fight against everyone in the Commonwealth, except for the Minutemen, they seem to be cool with them. Here is the population density and distribution for the Brotherhood at the end of the game. The Prydwen, unsurprisingly, has the highest concentration of all Brotherhood locations, and the second highest is just down on the ground below the Prydwen at the Boston Airport base. That is not all that surprising, though I would have thought more people and supplies would be moved off the Prydwen so that it would be easier to keep aloft, but whatever. The Brotherhood have fortified their position at the Cambridge police station and are using it as their second base in the Commonwealth, using the different parts of the station like the lockup, the evidence room, and the helipad on the roof for their own Brotherhood purposes. The next highest concentration of Brotherhood members is likely not meant to be long-term, as they rummage through as much technology and documentation as they can at Mass Fusion. The only other location the Brotherhood can be found at is Waypoint Echo, the super tiny little outpost that is only manned by 2 Brotherhood members. They have 1 gun turret and that's it. No other defensive structures, as they are sitting on the edge of the glowing sea, which is legendary for having the most dangerous creatures in the entire wasteland. They do seem to have some sort of communication array, so there does seem to be some purpose to this, but I bet this is where they send all the jackass knights that they just can't stand. The difference between this population map and the first one we saw is massive. The Brotherhood population has swelled over 20 times its pre-war number, and I would expect nothing less since the Brotherhood was here to eat gumdrops and kill synths, and Maxon ate all the gumdrops. Like all the other endgame factions, the Brotherhood will man a number of checkpoints throughout the Commonwealth, shown here, but manning these outposts seems a bit more hostile than the other factions, since the Brotherhood is in an ongoing campaign to rid the Commonwealth of undesirables. So we spent the last little while looking at how the Brotherhood expands, and where they conduct their operations and wage war, but what if the Brotherhood did not win the war? For the Railroad and the Institute, it is a matter of survival. They cannot exist so long as the Brotherhood is alive and well in the Commonwealth. But for the Minutemen, it's a bit different. The Institute attack on the Brotherhood is not all that interesting from our bird's eye perspective. The sole survivor is sent to disable 3 electromagnetic shield generators, at which point the Institute can teleport in reinforcements. Rather than relying on brute strength though, they reprogram Liberty Prime with a specially designed virus that changes its targeting parameters to fire on the Prydwen. 1 face laser blast and Maxon's little balloon comes tumbling down in a spectacular fashion. The Railroad has a somewhat different and far less elegant plan though. After thwarting a surprise Brotherhood attack on the Railroad base, the Railroad decides their only chance of survival is to strike back at the Brotherhood before they can muster up a larger attack force. This fly-by-wire plan involves traveling to the now very well fortified and manned Cambridge police station, and fighting through the entirety of the Brotherhood force there with just Deacon and Tinker Tom in order to hijack a Brotherhood vertibird. Tinker Tom flies, and I'm using that term very generously, the vertibird to the Prydwen, where it can dock, and if you're smart, you'll put on a Brotherhood uniform and sneakily place explosive charges on all the hydrogen balloons. If you're here for a fun time and not a long time, you can just go in guns blazing. The result is the same. Charges are placed on the hydrogen balloons that are helping to keep the Prydwen aloft, and when the infiltration team has gotten away to a safe distance, the charges are detonated and the hydrogen ignites, bringing down the old bird right on top of the Boston Airport base, destroying almost everything. The Minutemen are slightly different though. Their existence is never threatened by the Brotherhood, but after dealing with the Institute, it becomes clear that the Brotherhood represents a threat to the Minutemen's ability to self-govern and provide mutual aid and defense. Therefore, if the player decides, they can orchestrate a plan where 5 separate settlements must be equipped with artillery. I think the 5 closest settlements make the most sense, shown here, and they all fire on the Prydwen simultaneously when given the order the Minutemen-operated radio station. The Prydwen will go down in a blaze of bigotry, and the remaining Brotherhood forces will mount a counterattack on the castle, which must be defended. Half of the vertibirds come from the Boston Airport, which makes sense. That's where most of the Brotherhood could be found, but the other half come from this southwest direction. As far as we know, there are no known Brotherhood outposts in this direction. There's just the tiny waypoint Echo, which is definitely not the source of the vertibirds. So we either have to conclude that there is an unknown base with several vertibirds there, or that a number of them were on patrol south of Boston and were redirected to attack the castle. Successfully repelling the attack will effectively end the Brotherhood's ability to project power and oppose the Minutemen. Even though the Prydwen, Boston Airport Base, and likely the Cambridge Police Station base have all been destroyed, remnants of the Brotherhood are still roaming the Commonwealth and are usually encountered through some Railroad Radiant quests. The quest High Ground is given by Pam and involves traveling to where a Brotherhood vertibird has been seen and to shoot it down and kill all the Brotherhood soldiers. Another such quest, called A Clean Equation, has the sole survivor being sent to wipe out a Brotherhood patrol that is prowling the Commonwealth. So we know that the Brotherhood can be found in isolated groups, although what exactly they are doing and who is leading them is one big mystery. The simplest explanation is that they are still trying to carry out their previous directives. But I can't help but think that the smartest thing to do would be to try and get back to the Capital Wasteland to regroup and solidify under the next in command. The Brotherhood has their own set of Radiant quests though, like the Cleansing the Commonwealth quests given by Reese. These are quests where the player is sent to one of many, and I mean many, locations where they are to clear the undesirables that occupy the area. These are usually feral ghouls, super mutants, raiders, mirelurks, or even the children of Adam. I never did like this Reese guy. We see a pattern that has shown up so many times before, where the glowing sea is completely excluded, but the West also has far fewer areas than any other place, despite there being plenty of locations filled with super mutants, ghouls, and raiders. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason for the places chosen, since plenty of the locations don't have any desirable technology or information, like boring old Neo-Ponset Park. A similar quest given by Lancer Captain Kells has the player go to a fewer number of locations to clear out abominations, but the catch this time is that we have to babysit a squire while we do it. The leading by example quests has us go to locations that do seem more appropriate for the Brotherhood, locations that might have technology, information, or spare parts. The primary objective is still to destroy abominations, while the secondary is to help give a literal child combat experience. Nice. Another escort Radiant quest is Learning Curve, but this time a scribe is to be escorted to a location where desirable information is suspected to exist on some terminals. There are far fewer locations for this quest, but one of them includes the Gunners Plaza, which is just absolutely infested with heavily armed gunners, and fighting through that as one person while trying to keep a scribe from being killed is a tall order. Seriously, who signs off on these missions? Quarter Mastery is another Radiant quest given by Scribe Halen, where the sole survivor is supposed to once again travel to one of the many locations and recover a piece of technology. It is always one of 3 devices: a reflex capacitor, a haptic drive, or a flux sensor. All things that are ambiguously named enough to sound important, but not to actually mean a whole lot either. Maybe I can talk about this stuff in another video though. The last Radiant quest I find interesting, although not necessarily from a map perspective, is the one called Feeding the Troops. Proctor Tegan gives this quest and it can take you to any settlement in Fallout 4. He asks the sole survivor to persuade the local settlers to give up some of their food to the Brotherhood. And of course, this does not go over well. If the sole survivor is allied with the settlement, it can drop their affinity enough that they will no longer cooperate with the sole survivor, and how the food is procured can be as peaceful as a speech check, or as terrible as gunning everyone down. In the end, the most important thing is that the Brotherhood gets their food. And so we reach the end of the cartography analysis, but before I get too far, I wanted to do this community highlight. For those of you that would enjoy a unique role-playing experience, there is a new roleplay Discord server set in New Chicago, a location I have thought for a while would be a great place for a new Fallout. It is set in 2192, which is 5 years before the events of Fallout Tactics, and you can create your character and be guided through your own journey and plot arc by a dedicated game master through text-based roleplay. There are local factions, some of which are canonically familiar, and others which are entirely new, like Chicago's crime families. There are even other activities like major planned plot events and news stations, so anyone that is interested in joining in on the fun can follow the link, and for those interested in being a part of the project, should also join the server as well. I think it's so cool when fans put together big passion projects like this, so join using the link if you are interested or would like to show support. Thank you for joining me today, and thank you to my patrons and YouTube members for showing me support. I would especially like to mention new patrons, Mental Shatter, Acrid B, and Milk Tea, along with new YouTube members, Trafigo13 and Sparkmark. I am grateful for you, and for anyone else that would like to support my work in whatever way they would like. I have links to my Discord and Patreon in the description. Let Adam's glow guide you. Be kind to yourselves and others, and I will see you soon.